Nous Sommes is the latest full-length album from Suhnopfer, and I would say it's a very different one from Ardrouse, beyond his signature surviving this sound. And in a lot of ways, superficially, it is the blasting and freaked out French black metal you would expect from the artist, where his roots seem to have been in pagan black metal and that kind of thing, who eventually focused on melodic black metal out of that, and has variously been compared to everything from Sacramentum to Emperor over the course. I would relate his sound much more to Aurlach or Darkenhold, and I think that's not only because they are French and similar in their intent, but because their sourcing of melodies from classic French works is similar. And this is maybe an outlier for the brutal style of drumming that Ardrouse brings to all of his work. He was first known as a drummer. He does kind of approach this style of black metal as a drummer, and you can tell that he loves Far Away from the Sun. And that's very much, I would say, much more obvious on the first two records, and that began to expand a little bit more on the third. I think the best medium for my own taste was probably Operatoire, but I lean toward Nous Sommes Chapelle because it is the most classic feeling of his works thus far. It's worth it to go back and listen to his origins and where he kind of came from, because there is a lot of precedent set 20 years ago that it still applies to his work today. But this is something that is a little bit more refined. And I would say the thing to compare it to up front is probably Passeisme, if you were a fan of that record, and less so Hic Regnant Barboni Mains, because that record, the previous record, was much more in tune, as much in tune as he'd ever been with Scandinavian black metal per my own ear. And it was just too much more of the same. And this record does make a serious attempt to do something different, and they focus on various composers of the Baroque and what I would consider pre-romantic or classical era of composers, where they pull those vocal melodies from certain works and translate that to much higher sped guitar work, and it leads to variously inspired and I guess inventive melodies applied to melodic black metal and in his own style. So some of this is very predictable in its outcome, but it is all very long-winded and immersive per the 7 to 10 minute song lengths that dominate most of this record. Now, there's kind of two halves to this. It is a double LP with three sides. So the first two halves are each about 8 to 10 minute pieces on each side, and they're in this specific style, which is effective and a little bit repetitive and sometimes long-winded without purpose, but it generally makes good on the promise of this undertaking, which is vast and impressive, and probably going to take some time to delineate where these melodies all come from, even though he's given a few hints for some of these, which are direct references. Getting to the third side, and I think probably the most crucial side, it feels like a bit of leftovers that were meant to fill out a record that was already overflowing. And while this works for one of the songs, it leaves too much at kind of the end, and the Michel Polnareff cover that ends the record feels like this style of this cover could have been his own extrapolation into another full album, and I feel like the entirety of the third side of the record could have been left as an EP or a separate thing that doesn't make this experience feel any more complete. So there is a bit of an indulgence here, like a little bit of an overflow from this idea that kind of just made it onto a third disc that was unnecessary for my personal point of view. And I think that gets in the way of repeated listens, because as much as I love the cover, it is kind of one of the best songs on the album. It's part of that excess of those last three pieces, which just they're great, but it's too much of a good thing at that point when you've sat through the rest of the album, which really makes its statement in those first four songs. And Again, I don't mean to belabor the point. I really am a fan of melodic black metal, and especially the French side of it as it develops over the years. And I think this is a fine band and a great example of the style. I don't think this is the most effective work from the artist yet. It does show some big willingness to change and show more ambition with this sound rather than stick to the same thing. But I think it got a little bit too ambitious in terms of what it wanted to share. And just those four main blocks of pieces would have been enough for a record that would have impressed many people off the bat, and it would be easier to return to. So give it a shot if you might be into it. I think this came out earlier in the month, and moderately high recommendation for me. I think some of these pieces are quite challenging to sit through at first, but then they eventually show their virtues over time, and I found this record did last in mind. There were parts that were stuck in my head, and I enjoyed sort of investigating where some of these melodies came from. So if you're a nerd like that, maybe you'll like it. Check out my written review for more thoughts, and it's out.